security camera footage would later show it all. Karen Martinez reaching for her phone at exactly 3:47 p.m. Her manicured fingers dialing 911 as Michael Thompson approached the locked lake gate with his bolt cutters. What she didn't know was that 3 private investigators were already positioned in the woods behind her, cameras rolling, ready to capture the moment that would expose a conspiracy 5 years in the making. Michael Thompson had moved to Lakewood Estates thinking he'd found paradise. The gated community promised exclusive lake access, hiking trails, and the kind of peaceful retirement he'd earned after 30 years as a federal contractor. The HOA fees were steep at $400 monthly, but the amenities seemed worth every penny for the blissful years. Michael enjoyed morning kayaking sessions and evening fishing from the community dock. The lake was his sanctuary, a place where he could forget the stress of his former career in government logistics. But everything changed when Karen Martinez was elected HOA president. Karen arrived at the first board meeting with a thick binder and an agenda that would reshape Lakewood Estates forever. A former corporate lawyer with razor-sharp ambition, she saw inefficiencies everywhere and solutions that always seemed to benefit her inner circle. The lake maintenance costs are astronomical, Karen announced to the packed community center, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardroom battles. We're hemorrhaging money on insurance, lifeguard services, and equipment maintenance. I propose we temporarily close lake access while we reassess our options. The room erupted in protests. Residents had purchased their homes specifically for lake privileges. Property values would plummet. This was breach of contract. Karen's smile never wavered. This is a temporary measure. 6 months, maybe less. We need to explore partnerships with local marinas, possibly lease arrangements that could reduce our overhead. Michael stood up, his voice steady but firm. Karen, with all due respect, we pay substantial HOA fees specifically for these amenities. You can't just lock us out of facilities we're contractually entitled to use. Actually, Michael, Karen's tone turned ice cold. If you read Section 12.4 of the CC enters, the board has emergency powers to restrict access for safety and financial reasons. This vote is happening tonight. The vote was closer than expected for the 3 in favor of the lake closure. Michael noticed something odd about the voting pattern. The 3 board members who voted with Karen all lived in the newer section of the development, where HOA fees were mysteriously lowered despite identical amenities. Within a week, construction crews installed a heavy-duty chain-link fence around the entire lake perimeter, complete with no trespassing signs and security cameras. The gate was secured with an industrial padlock that would require professional tools to breach. Michael began documenting everything. He photographed the construction, recorded board meetings, and started connecting with other frustrated residents. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Property records showed that Karen's husband, David Martinez, owned Martinez Marina just 2 miles down the river. Phone records obtained through a private investigator revealed dozens of calls between Karen and David during the weeks leading up to the lake closure vote. Most damning of all, Michael uncovered evidence that the 3 board members who voted with Karen had received significant consulting payments from Martinez Marina in the months before the vote. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Close the community lake, force residents to use Martinez Marina for their boating needs, then gradually sell off portions of the lakefront property to developers. Karen would profit 3 ways: through her husband's marina, through kickbacks to complicit board members, and through eventual real estate development deals. Michael tried working within the system first. He filed formal complaints with the HOA, demanded financial transparency, and organized petition drives. Karen responded by weaponizing the CC and was against him, filing violation notices for everything from his mailbox height to the color of his garden mulch. The harassment escalated when Karen discovered Michael's investigation. She accused him of stalking board members, claimed his private investigator was trespassing, and threatened legal action if he didn't cease what she called his campaign of intimidation. "You're playing with fire, Michael," Karen warned during a tense confrontation in the community center parking lot. "I've dealt with men like you before. You think your military background makes you untouchable, but this isn't Afghanistan. This is my neighborhood, and I protect what's mine." Michael's jaw tightened. His background wasn't military, it was intelligence logistics. But he let Karen keep her assumptions. Sometimes it was better when adversaries underestimated your capabilities. The breaking point came on a sweltering July afternoon. Michael's 80-year-old neighbor, Eleanor, collapsed from heat exhaustion while walking to the distant public beach because the community lake remained locked. As paramedics loaded her into an ambulance, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He was going to open that gate. That evening, Michael sat in his study surrounded by legal precedents, property deeds, and surveillance photos. His phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator. "Package delivered. 3 units in position. Green light for Operation Transparency." Michael smiled grimly. Karen thought she was dealing with an angry retiree. She had no idea she was about to face someone who'd spent 3 decades outmaneuvering people. Far more dangerous than the suburban HOA president died at 3:45 p.m. the next day. Michael walked toward the lake gate with bolt cutters in hand, knowing Karen would be watching from her kitchen window as she did every afternoon. He also knew 3 private investigators with high-definition cameras were positioned to record everything that happened next. As Michael reached the gate, Karen's silhouette appeared in her window, phone already in hand. The bolt cutters felt heavier than Michael expected as he approached the padlock. His hands, steady during countless high-pressure situations in his former career, trembled slightly. This wasn't about cutting a lock anymore. This was about justice. For Eleanor. For every resident who'd been betrayed by the people they trusted to protect their interests. Karen's voice carried across the manicured lawns as she spoke to the 911 dispatcher. "Yes, there's a man attempting to break into our private lake facility. He's using some kind of tool to cut our security fence. I think he might be dangerous." Michael continued working on the lock, each snip of the cutters deliberate and measured. In the woods behind Karen's house, private investigator Sarah Chan adjusted her telephoto lens, capturing every frame of Karen's performance. Her colleagues, positioned at different angles, recorded both the phone call and Michael's methodical approach to the gate. The lock snapped. Michael pushed the gate open and stepped onto the dock he'd helped pay for with 5 years of HOA fees. The lake stretched before him, peaceful and pristine. A community asset being held hostage by greed and corruption. Police arrived within minutes, but their response wasn't what Karen expected. Officer Rodriguez, the responding patrol sergeant, had grown up in Lakewood and remembered when the lake was open to all residents. "Mom, can you show me the specific statute or ordinance that makes this a criminal trespass?" Rodriguez asked Karen, his tone professional but skeptical. Karen's confidence wavered. It's our HOA property. He's breaking our rules. HOA violations are civil matters, ma'am. Unless there's a criminal statute being violated, this isn't a police issue." While Karen argued with the officer, Michael stood calmly on the dock. His phone recorded the interaction. This was exactly the response he'd anticipated. His research had shown that HOA rule violations rarely constituted criminal activity, unless they involved actual property damage or safety violations. The real battle began the next morning when Michael found a legal notice taped to his front door. Karen had filed for an emergency restraining order, claiming Michael posed a threat to community safety and was engaging in harassment. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Michael called his attorney, Rebecca Walsh, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in corporate fraud cases. When she reviewed the evidence Michael had compiled, her reaction was immediate and intense. "This isn't just HOA corruption," Rebecca said, spreading documents across her conference table. "This is wire fraud, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty. Karen isn't just breaking HOA rules, she's breaking federal laws." The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed suspicious cash flows between Martinez Marina and shell companies. controlled by the three complicit board members. Email communications, obtained through legal discovery requests, revealed detailed discussions about property development deals that would net millions. Once the lake was declared financially unsustainable and sold to developers, most damning of all were the recorded phone calls. Sarah Chan's surveillance team had captured Karen coaching the other board members on how to vote and what to say in public meetings. One recording was particularly revealing. "Remember, we're not closing the lake permanently." Karen's voice was crystal clear on the digital recording. "We're creating a financial crisis that forces a sale. David's marina gets the boat traffic, we get development contracts. And these idiots never know what hit them." But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. Her restraining order request included fabricated claims about Michael following her, taking unauthorized photographs, and making threatening statements. She coached the board members to provide supporting affidavits that painted Michael as an unstable veteran with anger management issues. The psychological warfare escalated quickly. Michael's mailbox was vandalized. His car tires were slashed. Anonymous letters appeared under his door, warning him to back off or face consequences. Karen's allies in the HOA began filing daily violation notices against Michael for increasingly petty infractions. They're trying to break you psychologically before the legal battle even begins. Rebecca warned during a strategy session, classic corporate intimidation tactics. But they made a critical error. Rebecca smiled as she pulled out a thick folder. "They're treating this like it's still a simple HOA dispute. They don't realize we've elevated this to federal court. Wire fraud involving interstate commerce, conspiracy using electronic communications, civil rights violations under color of authority." Karen just graduated from HOA president to federal defendant. The federal investigation began quietly. Michael's background in government logistics had left him with contacts in various agencies, and his evidence package found its way to the right desks within weeks. Federal investigators were reviewing financial records and interviewing witnesses. Karen sensed the walls closing in. Her behavior became increasingly erratic. She called emergency board meetings to discuss security threats from Michael. She hired a private security company to patrol the community, paying for it with HOA funds. Most desperately, she attempted to rush through a vote to permanently sell the lake property to her husband's business partners. The night before the restraining order hearing, Michael received an unexpected phone call from Eleanor, the elderly neighbor whose heat exhaustion had triggered his decision to cut the lock. "Michael, dear, I need to tell you something." Eleanor's voice was shaky, but determined. "I heard Karen on the phone yesterday. She was talking to someone about making sure you never set foot near that lake again. She said something about having judges in her pocket from her legal career." Michael felt a chill. Judicial corruption would complicate everything, but it also provided another avenue for federal prosecution. He immediately called Rebecca and Sarah Chen to relay Eleanor's information. "Time to accelerate our timeline," Rebecca decided. "If Karen thinks she can manipulate the local court system, we need to be ready with our federal case. Sarah, I need your surveillance teams ready to document any contact between Karen and court officials." As Michael prepared for the restraining order hearing, he realized the stakes had escalated far beyond lake access rights. This was now a battle against a conspiracy that reached into the local legal system itself. Karen had built a network of corruption that extended beyond the HOA, and dismantling it would require precision, courage, and perfect timing. The evidence was solid. The federal investigation was building momentum, and his surveillance team had documented everything. But Michael knew the most dangerous moment was still ahead. Cornered criminals rarely surrendered quietly, and Karen Martinez had already proven she would fight dirty to protect her empire. Tomorrow's hearing would determine whether justice could still prevail in a system where judges might be compromised, and the truth could be buried under legal technicalities and fabricated testimony. Judge Patricia Hawkins had presided over civil disputes for 15 years, but she'd never seen a case filed quite like this one. What began as a simple HOA restraining order request had evolved into a federal investigation with surveillance footage, financial records, and allegations of conspiracy reaching into her own courthouse. Karen Martinez sat at the plaintiff's table, every inch the polished attorney despite no longer practicing law. Her husband David flanked her right side, while her legal counsel, Marcus Blackwood from the city's most expensive firm, commanded the left. They projected confidence, but Michael noticed Karen's hand shaking slightly as she organized her documents. Michael sat with Rebecca Walsh, their table covered with evidence binders, surveillance photographs, and audio equipment. Behind them, Sarah Chan and her investigative team occupied the gallery's front row, cameras discreetly positioned to record the proceedings. Eleanor and 12 other Lakewood residents filled the remaining seats, their presence a silent testament to the community impact of Karen's actions. Your Honor, Marcus Blackwood began, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone accustomed to high-stakes litigation. My client seeks protection from a campaign of harassment and intimidation that has escalated to criminal trespass and destruction of property. Mr. Thompson has demonstrated a pattern of unstable behavior that threatens community safety. Blackwood presented Karen's fabricated timeline of events, Michael allegedly following board members, taking unauthorized photographs, making threatening phone calls, and finally culminating in his violent breach of community security. 3. Sworn affidavits from board members supported every claim. Furthermore, Your Honor, Mr. Thompson's background in government intelligence work suggests he possesses skills that make his harassment particularly sophisticated and dangerous. We're not dealing with a typical neighbor dispute, but with someone trained in surveillance and intimidation techniques. Judge Hawkins reviewed the affidavits, her expression growing more skeptical with each page. Mr. Blackwood, these allegations are quite serious. Do you have any physical evidence supporting your claims of harassment and threatening behavior? We have witness testimony, Your Honor, and documented instances of property violations dating back months. Rebecca Walsh rose slowly, her federal prosecutor instincts fully engaged. Your Honor, may I respond to counsel's characterization of the evidence? Proceed, Counselor. Rebecca activated a digital presentation system that filled the courtroom's display screen with a timeline of events. Your Honor, what Mr. Blackwood has presented is a carefully constructed fiction designed to disguise the largest HOA fraud scheme this county has ever seen. The courtroom fell silent as Rebecca clicked through financial records, showing suspicious money transfers between Martinez Marina and shell companies controlled by board members. The plaintiff, Karen Martinez, conspired with her husband and 3 HOA board members to illegally close community lake access, forcing residents to use her family's commercial marina, while secretly negotiating to sell the lake property to developers. Karen's face flushed red as Rebecca continued, rather than harassment. Mr. Thompson was conducting legitimate investigation into criminal conspiracy. Every photograph he took, every meeting he attended, every document he requested was within his rights as a community member seeking to uncover fraud. Rebecca clicked to surveillance footage from the day Michael cut the lock. Your Honor, this is the incident that supposedly demonstrates Mr. Thompson's dangerous behavior. I'd like you to watch what actually happened. The courtroom watched in fascination as the video played. Michael's approach to the gate was methodical and calm. Karen's phone call to 911 was clearly audible. But what captured everyone's attention was the conversation between Karen and David Martinez. Immediately after the police left, "Did you get the development contracts finalized?" Karen asked her husband, her voice crystal clear on the audio track. "2 more weeks," David replied. "The lake sale goes through next month, and we pocket $12 million. These idiots will never know what hit them." Judge Hawkins paused the video. "Counselor Walsh, how did you obtain this recording?" "Private investigators hired by Mr. Thompson, Your Honor, all operating within legal parameters on public property. We have 17 hours of similar recordings documenting the conspiracy." Marcus Blackwood jumped to his feet. "Objection. This is entrapment, illegally obtained evidence, and irrelevant to the restraining order request." Overruled. The evidence directly contradicts the plaintiff's claims about Mr. Thompson's motivations and behavior. Rebecca played more recordings, each one more damaging than the last. Karen coaching board members on their false testimony. David Martinez discussing bribes to expedite development permits. Most shocking of all, a phone conversation between Karen and someone she addressed as Judge Morrison, discussing favorable rulings in exchange for campaign contributions. Judge Hawkins immediately called for a recess and summoned both attorneys to her chambers. When court resumed 20 minutes later, her demeanor had shifted dramatically. Before we continue with this restraining order hearing, Judge Hawkins announced, "I'm compelled to address some serious allegations that have emerged. Mrs. Martinez, are you aware that federal investigators are now examining your HOA's financial records?" Karen's composure finally cracked. "Your Honor, this is a conspiracy against me. Michael Thompson has been stalking my family for months. He's using his government connections to fabricate evidence. Mrs. Martinez, I've reviewed the surveillance footage and audio recordings. Unless you're claiming they've been digitally altered, the evidence speaks for itself." Rebecca stood again. "Your Honor, we have additional evidence that directly contradicts the plaintiff's sworn statements." She nodded to Sarah Chan, who activated another display showing time-stamped photographs. These images show Mrs. Martinez and Martinez Marina during times which she claimed in her affidavit to be afraid to leave her house due to Mr. Thompson's alleged harassment. Here she is conducting business meetings. Here she is reviewing development contracts. And here she is meeting with the same board members who provided supporting affidavits. The photographs destroyed Karen's credibility completely. Each image was time-stamped and geotagged, showing her conducting normal business activities during periods which she claimed to be hiding in fear of Michael's harassment. Marcus Blackwood whispered frantically with his client, but Karen seemed to have reached a breaking point. She stood abruptly, pointing an accusatory finger at Michael. "You think you're so smart with your spy games and secret recordings," she snarled. "All pretense of victimhood abandoned. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've been planning this development for 3 years. I have contracts, I have permits, and I have judges who understand that progress requires sacrifice." The courtroom erupted. Judge Hawkins banged her gavel repeatedly. "Mrs. Martinez, you need to consult with your attorney immediately." But Karen was beyond legal counsel. Years of careful planning and meticulous corruption had collapsed in a single afternoon, and her rage overwhelmed her judgment. These people moved to Lakewood for lake access. Too bad. The lake is worth $20 million in development revenue. David and I earned that money by taking risks these sheep never would. If that makes us criminals, then the system is broken. Marcus Blackwood looked like he wanted to disappear. Rebecca Walsh was frantically taking notes, knowing that Karen's outburst would be crucial evidence in the federal case. Judge Hawkins called another recess, but this time she didn't return for 20 minutes. When court reconvened, her expression was grim, based on the evidence presented today and Mrs. Martinez's own statements. "I'm not only denying the restraining order request, but I'm also forwarding this entire case file to federal prosecutors and the state attorney general's office for investigation of potential criminal violations." Karen sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Her attempt to silence Michael through legal intimidation had instead provided prosecutors with a complete roadmap to her criminal enterprise. But as court adjourned, Michael noticed Karen's expression shift from defeat to something more dangerous. She whispered something to David Martinez that made him nod grimly. Rebecca caught Michael's arm as they gathered their documents. "This isn't over," she warned quietly. "We just backed them into a corner, and cornered animals are unpredictable. The federal case will take months to develop, and Karen knows it. Watch your back." As Michael left the courthouse, he felt victorious but wary. The truth was finally emerging. But Karen Martinez had just lost everything she'd worked years to build. People who committed this level of fraud rarely accepted defeat gracefully, and her final whisper to her husband suggested they had one more card to play. Federal prosecutors moved with unprecedented speed once Judge Hawkins forwarded the case file. Within 30 days, a grand jury had issued indictments for wire fraud, conspiracy, and civil rights violations against Karen Martinez, David Martinez, and the 3 complicit board members. The investigation had also uncovered the corruption involving Judge Morrison, leading to his immediate suspension in a separate criminal case. Michael stood in the federal courthouse 6 months later, watching Karen and David Martinez enter guilty, pleas to avoid lengthy prison sentences. The scheme had been even more extensive than anyone initially realized. Financial forensics revealed they'd embezzled over $400,000 in HOA funds, manipulated multiple development contracts, and bribed local officials to expedite their plan. Mrs. Martinez, Federal Judge Robert Chen addressed Karen as she stood before the bench. "You violated the trust of every resident in your community. You used your position of authority to steal from the very people who elected you to protect their interests. The court sentences you to 36 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and full restitution to the Lakewood Estates HOA. David Martinez received a similar sentence for his role in the conspiracy. The 3 board members received probation and community service in exchange for their cooperation with investigators. But as Karen was led away in handcuffs, she turned to make eye contact with Michael one final time. Her expression wasn't defeat or remorse. It was cold calculation, as if she were memorizing his face for future reference. Rebecca Walsh noticed the exchange. She's already planning her next move. She warned Michael quietly, 36 months isn't long for someone with her resources and connections. Keep your guard up. The community restoration began immediately. The new HOA board, elected in an emergency vote, reopened the lake within a week of Karen's sentencing. Property values, which had declined during the corruption scandal, began recovering as word spread about the community's successful fight against fraud. Michael finally had his peaceful retirement back, but something felt incomplete. During the federal investigation, one piece of evidence had never made sense. Karen's phone records showed dozens of calls to an unlisted number during the weeks leading up to her arrest. The FBI had traced the number to a burner phone that was never recovered. 3 months after Karen began serving her sentence, Michael received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor knocked on his door at sunset, carrying a manila envelope that would change everything he thought he knew about the case. "Michael, dear, I need to show you something," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with excitement rather than frailty. "I've been waiting for the right time, and I think that time is now." Inside the envelope were photographs, financial documents, and surveillance equipment receipts that told an incredible story. Eleanor hadn't been an innocent bystander in the HOA corruption case. She had been conducting her own investigation for over 2 years. "You see, dear, I'm not just a retired school teacher." Eleanor smiled with the satisfaction of someone finally revealing a long-held secret. "I spent 30 years as a forensic accountant for the Treasury Department. I specialized in tracking financial crimes and building cases against white-collar criminals." Michael stared at the evidence spread across his kitchen table. Eleanor had documented every aspect of Karen's scheme months before Michael had even begun his investigation. She had surveillance photos, recorded conversations, and financial analysis that would have made federal prosecutors weep with joy. "But why didn't you come forward earlier?" Michael asked, still processing the revelation. Eleanor's smile widened. "Because I needed someone with your background to be the public face of the investigation." Karen would never have suspected an 80-year-old woman of conducting sophisticated surveillance, but a former government contractor asking questions that would get her attention and make her sloppy. The final pieces clicked into place. Eleanor's heat exhaustion incident wasn't accidental. She had deliberately created a situation that would push Michael into action. Knowing his protective instincts and investigative skills would make him the perfect unwitting partner. The burner phone number the FBI couldn't trace. Eleanor produced a second phone from her purse. "That was me. I was feeding Karen false information to make her panic and accelerate her timeline. Every mistake she made, every overreach that provided evidence against her, happened because I was manipulating her paranoia. Michael laughed despite himself. The sweet elderly neighbor, who had seemed like a victim throughout the entire ordeal, had actually been the mastermind behind Karen's downfall. Eleanor, you orchestrated this entire investigation. Not orchestrated, dear. Got it. You did all the real work, took all the real risks. I just made sure Karen's own greed and arrogance would provide the rope to hang herself. With Eleanor pulled out one final document, a detailed financial analysis showing that Karen's scheme was even larger than federal prosecutors had discovered. Hidden offshore accounts contained an additional $2.3 million in stolen HOA funds and development kickbacks. This is your retirement gift, Michael, Eleanor said, sealing the evidence back in its envelope. Karen thought she was so clever, but she forgot that the greatest weapon against corruption is an informed community member, willing to stand up for what's right. You were that person, and I was proud to help make sure justice was served. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Michael realized that his quiet retirement community had been home to one of the most sophisticated white-collar investigations he'd ever seen. An octogenarian with a Treasury Department background had used him as a winning asset to bring down a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. One more thing, dear. Eleanor paused at the door. Karen's early release for good behavior? That won't be happening. This additional evidence will add another 18 months to her sentence. Some lessons are worth learning the hard way. Michael watched Eleanor walk back to her house, still processing the revelation that his elderly neighbor was actually a retired federal investigator who had played Karen Martinez like a chess grandmaster manipulating an amateur opponent. The lake sparkled in the evening light, finally returned to the community that had paid for it. Justice had been served, corruption had been exposed, and one of the most audacious HOA fraud schemes in history had been dismantled by the combined efforts of a retired government contractor and an octogenarian forensic accountant. Sometimes the most unlikely partnerships produce the most satisfying victories. If you found this story as incredible as we did, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Real-life legal battles are often stranger than fiction, and we've got dozens more stories of ordinary people fighting extraordinary corruption. What would you have done in Michael's situation? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the person you least suspect might be your greatest ally in the fight for justice.